All right. Where is the volume? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We have a quorum present. We'll call this meeting of the Ways and Means Committee to order. And I've got one request from somebody that's got to be in 4 places at one time, and I suspect that's going to be the case a lot today. So with no further ado, unless anybody has anything for the committee before we start, Chair recognizes Representative Lunsford to present your proposition, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is that on?
Members of the committee. You ready, sir?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. I can hear it through the speaker. Thank you for the opportunity. And, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your indulgence. I do have to be in Health and Human Services as well as in some other meetings in the next 30 minutes. But this is simply a study committee. We're asking to seat. We had a bill in Health and Human Services, and we've tabled that measure, realizing that we may make something that was an inadvertent change that we had no intention of doing yet, just requesting a little time so we could study the issue over the summer, and that's all this is just a study committee, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I'm sorry, I must have missed some of that. Could you tell me what it is we're going to study?
Yes, sir. Indigent care and the percentages that each is paid for by different hospitals, and see if there's any correlation between profit, not-for-profit hospitals, Medicaid, Medicare, and indigent care, just studying the medical service delivery of our state, sir.
Okay. All right. Are there any questions for the author? I don't see any. We'll look forward to taking this up for a vote at our very next meeting. Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else here for legislation? I see my good friend Senator Smith. Is there anybody else here that has a need to go first? All right, Chair recognizes Senator Smith. Let me get your. Is it Senate Bill 58?
Yes, it is, Chairman. Thank you very much. And
Please, sir, proceed.
I too have a presentation in House Health at the same time, so I appreciate you all hearing this early. I was here last year with this, and the bill passed out of committee last year, went to rules, and came back. So we've been here before. In the current version of the code, when a property owner owns property in multiple counties, the same piece of property spills over into multiple counties, the code allows for the property owner to pay the largest county the total amount of the taxes, and then for that tax commissioner to separate out which gets paid to which other county for their assessments and their millage and so forth, and to remit those payments to those junior counties. And, really we're in a situation now where the counties know exactly where the property is. They know where their lines are. They generate their own bills. The bills are different. The millage rates change between counties and so forth. And so it just seems to make sense for each county to bill the property owner for the property in that county. And that takes it away from the tax commissioners having to receive a payment of money that's in excess of the amount of that county, and then to figure out how much is owed to which county and divide that up on a pro rata basis. So the tax commissioners have actually requested the ability to do this in a way that eliminates that code section, so that each county just bills for the property in their county, and the property owner remits that payment pursuant to the bill. And we had talked through last year whether or not this would have an effect on property transactions, closings, real estate closings, and things like that. And I think everybody is at least pretty comfortable at this point that it's not going to have any impact on that. And that's all the bill does, is repeal that section. I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
I remember it from last year, but if you would indulge us, I think we do have some questions and a need to kind of refresh our memory. And also, if you don't mind, but only if you don't mind, there might be some people from the audience also that might want to ask a question or two, but I'll let you decide whether or not you recognize that or not.
I'll be happy to.
Since we're more here for information and just getting back up to speed. I remember this was some pretty good legislation. 29, who is that? Representative Jameson has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Smith, the effective date of this legislation would be
Well, it would be July 1st when it's not stated on the legislation. There's sort of the presumption that it's July 1st. So there's no effective date spelled out on the legislation. But when there's not, it's by default July 1st.
So that would get us ahead of tax collection the tax collection period for most of our counties. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
Thank you.
And this is their proposal, so they're pretty comfortable with that idea.
Senator Smith, I was approached by some folks in the hall just today, and the question was from a taxpayer perspective: Are we not making it now more difficult for the taxpayer, or is this making it easier?
I think there's a good argument that it makes it easier because it creates clarity on where you're sending the payment, and there's no middleman to confuse whether or not you've paid, whether or not it was timely, whether or not the appropriate amount got remitted to the appropriate county. So I really feel like that to the extent that you own property in a county, that county invoices you and you pay your bill, you can know for sure that you paid the right place, the right amount of money. If you're sending an amorphous amount of money to one county and it may go to 2, 3, 4 different counties, you're depending upon that office to figure those things out and make sure your money gets transferred to the appropriate authority. So I think it brings clarity, and we've in the 2 years this bill has been pending, I haven't heard those objections. And that doesn't mean, of course, as you all know, they wouldn't come up at the end, but we've been through subcommittee twice and the committee twice in this process and really haven't heard any strong objections to the bill. But I think the argument would be more properly that it is an easier and more clear process for taxpayers than the current system.
Currently, when this issue manifests itself, let's say, for example, I'd love to have this, by the way, 100 acres, and I'm sort of at the corner of 3 counties. Would I currently get 3 bills?
Well, right now, you would end up, as I understand it, and Gene McRae, on behalf of the tax commissioners, is here, I think you may get a single bill. Or you may get 3 bills and you can pay 1 to the largest county, and then they divide them up. I may have to ask the tax commissioners, but this would ensure that you would get 3 bills and send to the appropriate authority the right amount.
And if we don't do this and we choose to pay the county in which the majority of our property is located, and for whatever reason, even an honest mistake on their part, the other counties don't get paid, there's a chance that would get FIFA'd and executed and collected, and it would harm our credit worthiness potentially and be embarrassing, right?
That's exactly right. Now, you could raise certain defenses that you had paid and satisfied the bill, but you're talking about a legal process that has both time and money involved, and in the meantime, you could find yourself sideways with credit bureaus and so forth for not paying those taxes.
Okay. Is there anybody from the audience that would like to be heard on this issue?
Mr. Chairman, Gene McRae, I'm here representing Georgia Association of Taxing Officials, and we ask the senators to move this bill forward. And obviously, we're in support. If we can answer the questions, we'd be happy to. Short of that, we don't expect.
Okay. I see somebody I have a tremendous amount of respect for his legal acumen. Mr. Grubiak, do you have any comments on behalf of ACCG?
Yes, sir, thank you. I think we're in support of the legislation.
Okay. Number 24, is that Chairman Royal? Oh, Chairman Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Smith, how are these properties put on the tax rolls for the different, if it's in different counties? Do the tax commissioner, say in one county, send a tax bill to the other tax commissioner? He said he only got 1 bill. Or does each county send their own? I mean, it's got to be on the tax rolls.
Yeah. Yes, Mr. Chairman. Each commissioner, each county knows what property is in their county, and they have established on their rolls the amount of the property, the millage rate, the amount of the tax for that parcel, and so each one currently knows and has divided out what amount is owed. What is allowed right now is for taxpayers to pay the amount to the senior landholding county, and then for that money to be remitted to the other counties on a pro rata basis according to their percentage of where the land falls. So there's no question that with today's technology and the way the tax digest is set up, that the tax commissioners do know and the counties do know how much property and what the rate is and how much is owed for each piece, even though that piece expands beyond their county boundaries.
Will there be some provision to notify these taxpayers it's going to be done a little bit differently? In other words, you're trying to eliminate a lot of duplication by letting each county then send that bill to that individual, and he should be expecting to get, if he's in 3 counties, he gets 3 bills. Is that?
That's right. That's
okay.
right.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Anybody else wish to be heard from on this legislation? Senator Smith, we thank you, and we look forward to voting on this at our very next meeting. We thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. Who else is here? I don't see well. Representative.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Davis, speak on behalf of Senate Bill 132. At your pleasure.
132?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sir. Please, you're recognized for that purpose.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. Senate Bill 132, and before I continue, I will also point out that it does have a favorable consideration of the tax commissioners as well. I also have in my hand a copy of the letter from the Georgia Association of Assessing Officials who are indicating their favorable support as well. What this bill does, it allows, and it's specific to a number of counties, most importantly Richmond County, that in 1993 was subject to population statute, which established March the 1st as the filing deadline for property tax returns. But because of the expansive growth of Richmond County, it is now April 1st. And what this bill does is it allows us, upon your favorable consideration, allows us to move that date back to March 1st for property tax considerations.
Okay. Chair recognizes Representative Scott. If you have a question, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Davis, for coming before Ways and Means today with this this hardy legislation. Can I ask you, is this your first time to come before Ways and Means with a bill?
The gentleman knows of that which he speaks.
Well, I just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all the committees that I have. That's all the questions I have right now.
For right now, at least, right? Okay, I understand. Representative Jameson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Am I correct in reading the bill that following this change, if Senate Bill 132 is successful, then by local legislation we would actually change it so each county could continue to have a deadline of April 1 should they choose to? Is that correct?
That's correct, Representative James.
Thank you.
Representative Peake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To my distinguished fellow freshman, Representative Davis, so you're telling me if we pass this legislation that my Captain D's going to have to, in Augusta, going to have to file their tax return by March 1st, and if we agree to do that, you promise you're going to go eat at Captain D's a little more often for all the additional work I'm going to have to do to get this thing done on a timely basis. Is that what you're telling me?
If your question is, will I eat at Captain D's more, that is correct.
Okay, that's my question. That's exactly, that's why I moved to pass it, Mr. Chairman.
You're not recognized for that motion. And there are days we can barely recognize you about anything. Representative, I really do have a reasonably serious question. Could you tell me what your understanding of the definition person authorized to receive tax returns, what that means to you?
Where are you referring to, Mr. Chairman? In here in section line
14. Well, actually line 11, and it's also on line 14, both places.
Again, I believe that would be the local jurisdiction in terms of the person authorized to receive tax returns.
Would that not be a tax
assessor
commissioner typically?
Yes, sir.
Or
that is correct. Or assessor.
Or assessor.
Yes.
So there's a chance it's different in county by county?
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The tax commissioner can appoint the assessors to be the receiver of the return.
Okay. And are the folks with Gato in favor. I think I heard you say that earlier. Is
Yes,
that right? Okay.
I did say that.
All right. Representative Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unlike Representative Peak over there, used to be a CPA, I am still a CPA. And are y'all trying to kill us during this time period? A little extra month makes a difference with filing these as far as closing out books. And I do say that in all fairness. I know my friends at Gato have worked closely with them on other issues. But a very serious question or thought is the closing out of books per se and making sure that everything has been recorded properly, especially when we start looking at larger businesses with especially the depreciation schedules and things like that. I just want to put that thought out there and maybe let us think on that a little bit and see how that affects our citizens and our business community.
One of the things I'll also point out, Representative Knight, to your point, is that this proposed amendment will require no action from counties that do not desire an earlier return date.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please.
I
do.
guess I'm not worried about the ones that don't want it. I'm worried about the ones who do want it.
Okay.
Representative Knight, how would depreciation relate to this legislation, in your opinion?
If we're personal property returns, I mean, we're adding in the personal property, tangible property. Usually they're requesting in most of the property returns a copy of the depreciation schedule. Yeah. So.
So, also, things like our omnibus legislation where we incorporate different methods of depreciation, expansion of Section 179 and those sorts of things would have to be determined prior to these filings, right? And as an example, this year we're at March, 18th today, and we have not yet passed that legislation. So it may be ambitious and certainly worthy of consideration by this committee and others. And maybe when you come back to this committee for a vote, you'll be able to speak to some of those sensitive issues, or maybe the possibility of an extension for cause. Because sometimes this data is just not available to filers. Possibly.
I'll make a note of that, Mr. Chairman, and again be ready to speak to that.
Okay. Anyone in the audience? Yes, sir. Could you tell us who you are and who you represent, if anyone besides yourself?
I'm Wheeler Bryan. I'm an attorney. Since '93, I've done nothing but property tax work. I've done work in probably 50 counties in Georgia. Probably filed several thousand property tax returns. I don't recommend anybody, because nobody's going to pay you to come over here and argue about a bill like this. But this is a real serious matter for taxpayers and those people. I have a great deal of respect for the CPA that mentioned it, because this includes personal property as well as real property returns. It includes applications for conservation use, CUBA. It includes applications for agricultural preference. It includes some Freeport applications. It includes a lot of things other than just real property. And I noticed that Senate Bill 159 is on the agenda, and that bill provides that the homestead exemption application will be the same as the property, other property tax returns. Some of you have heard the problem in Fulton County when everybody was notified on March 1st that the deadline was March 1st. We really have a serious problem in this state about when property tax returns and homestead exemption applications and other applications of this nature are filed. There are about 10 counties that have March 1. They're on the website of the Department of Revenue. All the other 148, I think it is, counties have April 1. And when you're doing commercial real property and you're using the income approach, you hardly ever get the income and expense statements for the business before mid-February a lot of times, and you use that to make a return. So this really does put a burden on not only taxpayers, but people that work for taxpayers. Gerald Edenfield, the president of the State Bar, has encouraged us lawyers to lend our expertise to the legislators of our districts. Not particularly doing that, just speaking from somebody that's got some experience in this area. Now, I know the tax assessors especially want to do the March 1, and they say, well, they can't get their work done. But the taxpayers are going to be put under a burden if you use March 1. I firmly believe, I do work in this area. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer. The question you asked about the person authorized to accept returns, some counties use the Board of Tax Assessors, some use the Tax Commission. I've been working 50-some-odd counties in Georgia. You got to go find out the date and the place to file before you can ever start filing a return. And that's real property, personal property, CUBA applications, any of these kinds.
Thank you, sir. Representative, would you like to speak to those comments?
And again, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. What I want to continually point out is that our hope here with this piece of legislation is that it'll have direct impact where Richmond County is concerned. Currently, there are 10 counties already that have a March 1st return date. Some of them are fairly sizable counties, to include Gwinnett, Hall, and even Bibb County. As it relates to Richmond County, this will certainly help us in terms of our ability to be able to do our tax as far as compiling and digest is concerned, and it'll help us. I understand those concerns that the gentleman has raised, but it will be my hope that we will look at it, and then when we come to the next meeting, I'll try to address some of the concerns that Representative Knight had, and hopefully be able to get a favorable consideration from this committee.
Okay. Representative Beasley Teague, is that right?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, I want to know if it's any way possible we could work this where it would only deal with Richmond and other counties that already have this date. Because that is what he wants, Richmond County. Everybody don't necessarily want it, but if you...
But the way we've drafted this, Representative Teague, is that it will require this amendment will require no action from any counties that do not want an earlier date.
Okay.
Yeah, we've already addressed that.
This appears to be enabling for each county
That's
to
correct.
do that, but I think what we're hearing from the other side of the issue is that may actually, the inconsistency county to county might be part of the problem and not the solution if you listen to the advocates for the taxpayer side. So I think there's going to be a healthy debate on this and a balance before it's over, and I look forward to hearing more from the representative. And also, I think Senator Tarver is the sponsor of this. So.
And he is here.
Oh, good. Senator, would you like to be heard on?
No, I think that's all the issues that we've been prepared to answer. I think some of the information I've heard was inconsistent with what we've been provided, but we'll certainly look into it. I'm one of those members of the bar that's been urged to get involved in these issues as well. So I look forward to talking with the gentleman about the concerns he's raised.
Okay.
Well, I certainly hope I haven't said anything incorrectly. I make a living, have since '93 doing this, so I hope I haven't.
There's some others in the room that do the same, sir. We understand. I don't see any other questions. It was Representative Pika, I think, that called you a fellow freshman. You did an excellent job, freshman or not, and we do appreciate your presentation and look forward to hearing more from you on this legislation as we move forward.
Thank you, members of the committee.
Thank you. Representative Hurd, are you with us? Yeah, I think I saw you come in. You're recognized to tell the committee about House Resolution 1563, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your time and consideration of this, and thank the time and the consideration by your impressive and powerful committee. What I'm bringing to you is House Resolution 1563. What it does is basically request a study committee be put together to review issues around the border of the state where we have got people advertising to buy from out of state and not pay sales taxes. I've got some flyers that if it's the pleasure of the chairman, I will hand out to the committee. think what this does is show vividly that we have a problem, and the particularly in the ATV business up around Chattanooga and Columbus and over on the South Carolina border, there's folks that are just taking advantage of our tax structure and the lack of time and demand that our Department of Revenue puts on to out-of-state vendors. And they even, as you see in that 3 different advertisements here, are advertising that dodge the Georgia state sales tax and buy from us. So if it's the chairman's pleasure, there's a couple of amendments I would like to offer to the resolution, but I'll be open to any questions you may have.
Thank you, sir. I think you're on to what appears to be an epidemic stage, and I certainly laud the gentleman chairman for initiating this. There's a lot about it we don't know yet, but we certainly owe it to those honorable Georgia businesses to keep a level playing field at the very least in what we hope would be considered a capitalistic society, and not use tax code to unfairly compete against our own citizens. Chair recognizes the Vice Chairman of the committee, Chairman Sims.
Mr. Hurd, in no way are you looking at trying to title these things, are you?
That's a different day, different time.
Okay. The reason I'm saying I got a little experience in that, I think Mr. Rice and I will both agree. If you get into that area, you're going to run into some extremely vocal folks. One of the things I would like to see that you look at along with this is the issue of these things being used on the public roads. But I understand that this is something that we looked at for a whole year before. The use of these things is the problem I got. As you know, I had 5 children killed at one time on an ATV on a public road in my county. It's still a very, very, very terrible accident, and it still has caused a lot of problems in my district because of the issue that went on there. I would really like to see you do that, but I'm not going to try to amend your bill. I understand what you're doing here. Please do look that over, though, because you're going to find that this ATV use in the state is, in my opinion, an epidemic proportion on public roads, and we're going to see a lot more people killed on these things. I'm not against ATVs being used where they need to be, but if they're on public roads or have access to public roads, you're going to see a lot more. Thank you.
I suppose that was a question, Chairman Hurd. I'm not sure.
Yes, sir, I agree.
At this point, yeah. Chairman Scott, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Hurd, I'm glad you're bringing this forward, and I think that it is a serious problem. It's a very serious problem for ATV dealers in my area, in Rossville. We've got a couple of ATV dealers there, and they've talked to us about this before. Without getting into titling of these ATVs, which that gets to the other side of it. I've heard from the dealers who some of them are personal friends of mine, and they'll tell you that they want to have some mechanism to require registration or something so that the sales tax is paid here in Georgia, so that these types of advertisements, which are misleading, are not used to lure buyers from Georgia into Tennessee. This one's Hickson and Chattanooga and some other places, and I've seen some of these. What other than titling, what are some of the methods that you have come across so far that might work to cause folks not to be lured under the false sense that they'll avoid sales tax into other neighboring states to buy their ATVs?
Well, that's why we're requesting that we have a study committee put together. We don't have the solutions right now, and that's what I'm hoping the committee will be able to come up with.
Okay, so you don't have any
initial... not going in with any preconceived.
Okay.
As you're well aware, I did the boat titling bill this year that's over in the Senate right now, and I did find out a huge amount about titling processes and the benefits and the adversity to titling. So that is not the target that I'm approaching on this.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
I'm trying to capture the sales revenues that are due for the state of Georgia, as well as trying to protect the honest vendors that we have within our state.
Right. I'm glad to hear that, because while at the same time, when I started doing some inquiries locally about what to do about it, we had comments from the dealers, of course, saying we want something done. They wanted titling, full out titling of these, and I got a lot of calls from ATV users who weren't real happy about that. Probably the same folks that called Chuck or Representative Sims when he was trying to title ATVs a couple years ago. So thank you for doing this, and I'll look forward to seeing what your recommendations are.
As will I. Chairman Williams?
Yes, sir.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Hurd, what is the only evidence of ownership of these things a bill of sale? Is that all
that is correct,
or is that even required?
No, just a bill of
sale.
To transfer ownership from one owner to another, it's purely in the hands of the trust of the two doing the transaction. Okay. There's no requirement that a bill of sale be attached, okay. But I think if you're trying to resell it later on, you might be good to track that transaction.
So it's pretty loose. I mean,
pretty loose.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but they can't get their tag
now. Okay. This would also apply to boats and other high-ticket items. And
well,
really
what we're talking about right now
so.
is just the study committee would just be for ATVs. Oh. Now, as the committee gets into it, if other things come up, such as boats or any other type of recreational vehicle, or major purchase that is around, what we're looking at is violations of the state sales tax in adjacent states.
Well, it's actually, it might involve what we call use tax as well, not just correct. Sales. And it'll be sales and use, because it may convert to a use tax when imported back into Georgia. And we do look forward to that. We ran across a lot of that in our tax reform study committees over 2 years, and I certainly laud the gentleman's initiative and ambition to do this.
Well, as I said, I learned a lot with the boat titling bill, and that is in no way my intention on this piece of this request.
Since you're the author, you mentioned amendments. I would suggest, since we're not voting today, we put that out on our meeting notice. We weren't sure we could even get a quorum given how many meetings were going on. That you just do a committee sub to your liking and bring that back for consideration, and we don't have to go through the amendment process.
And if I would, I'd just like to voice what that would be. And as you look into the text of the bill on line 15, I've actually written myself out of an opportunity to be involved in the study committee by outlining who the 4 members, what committees those 4 members come from, of which I'm on neither one of those 2 committees. So I'd request that the Speaker just assign 4 members at large, not 4 specific committees.
That generally makes it a lot easier to pass when you just give that total discretion to the Speaker. So.
That's right.
Okay. Any other questions for the Chairman? I don't see any. Thank you for that presentation, and we look forward to taking this up next meeting. I see my good friend from Middle Georgia, Senator Staten, has to come in. We're delighted to have you, sir. We recognize you as the primary author, I think, of Senate Bill 159. Please, sir, tell us about it.
Thank you, my good friend, Mr. Chairman, and members of this committee. I appreciate your hearing Senate Bill 159, which I bring to you on behalf of your county tax commissioners. I'm very pleased to have one of the commissioners from my district, one of my 5 counties, Commissioner Tedder's here today, and it's good to see him in the audience. This is a relatively simple bill, which, as I mentioned, I bring on behalf of our tax commissioners, that would simply change the date for homestead exemptions, making your application for a homestead exemption, which currently is March 1st, and if this bill were to become law, the date would change to read in the law the date for the closing of the books for the return of taxes for the calendar year. The practical application of this, I believe, is that for most Georgians, it would provide them with up to an extra month for filing their homestead exemptions, and it provides perhaps for some cleaner operations for our tax commissioners. And again, we have some here who could probably speak to the details of that much better than I could, Mr. Chairman. But that essentially is what this bill does. It just would have the effect of extending the period of time for filing the homestead exemption to match up with the date for the closing of the books for return of taxes for the calendar year in a particular county.
With your permission, Senator, you came in after we sort of did the rules of the day.
Yes.
We have had folks that want to speak from the audience, but in respect to my Senate colleagues, I'll not recognize anybody unless you permit that. We do have one person signed up, which is your tax commissioner. With your permission, I'd like to recognize Commissioner Tetters.
Thank you very much. I would appreciate that. I think he is far better to talk to the application of this in real life than I am.
And he can talk from his place there if you'd like to. Right there is fine.
Yes. As the gentleman pointed out earlier, there are some inconsistencies in the deadlines across the state. And this conversation actually came about between Senator Staten and myself because of some businesses and properties that he has in other counties. Bibb County is a county with split billing, so therefore I have a March 1st due date because I have an earlier deadline, and that's why I have a March 1st due date. But there are a number of counties to where you can apply for a homestead exemption year-round. That's not the issue. The issue is qualifying for the exemption for that year. To qualify for the exemption for that year, you have to apply by March 1st in order to receive it. However, the tax return for real property also has a disclosure on there to file a homestead exemption. So its due date is April the 1st, but the homestead date, qualifying date is March the 1st. There's that inconsistency. So the tax commissioner looked at it and just asked that if we can move that qualifying date to April the 1st, then regardless of whether you make the application to the tax commissioner's office for homestead or whether you make the tax return with a declaration of homestead, the person still receives it. So in 149 counties, the taxpayers will receive an extra 30 days, and that's no problem for the tax commissioner or the assessor.
Actually, Mr. Tetters, and this is a question. We don't move the date to April 1st. We move the date to the date that the return of taxes is due, whatever that might be, right?
That date is, yes, sir. For the counties who have March 1st, it will not affect their dates. For the counties with April 1st, it will give them an extra 30 days. If there's another date prescribed by law, it will be that day. So therefore, it matches everybody's date for return of taxes.
Well, that's way too logical. Why are we doing that? Thank you. Any Chair recognizes Chairman Sims.
No.
Oh, I thought you had a question. Oh, someone. Yes, sir.
May I speak?
You may.
Again, I'm Wheeler Bryan. For your information, I'm an attorney and since '93 have done nothing but property tax work. Done work in some 50 counties, filed hundreds and thousands of property tax returns, done over 1,000 Board of Equalization hearings. Theoretically, I am in favor of this because of the problem that the deadline of March 1 in all counties, no matter what your deadline for filing returns is, really, that creates complications on complications. To be very candid with you, I wish we would go to April 15th for all deadlines, for all property tax returns, all real property, personal property, and everything. And that would make it so much simpler for, I think, everybody. Now, I know the tax people will say, well, they can't get their job done, but they said that when the Revenue Commissioner said they had to have their digest in by August 1st, but they've gotten them in. So I'm not an expert in the county operation because I've never represented anybody but taxpayers. But the problem of having, if the senator's bill from Richmond County goes through, and you will be inundated, I feel, by local tax people that will want you to change by local legislation their date that's already April 1st in 148 counties.
If we could, please, sir, if you would keep your comments to this bill at this time, okay? Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say that if that bill passes and everybody changes to March 1, then this bill will make March 1 the deadline, and it will create that much more confusion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
March 1 already is a deadline, isn't it? Yeah, okay. All right. Other questions for Senator Staten, or would you like to respond to those remarks, either of those sets of remarks?
Well, I'm not certain that I have a lot of information to add, except that without trying to change every county's date, which might be more involved, this, I think, is the best we could hope to do at this time, because in the case of most counties, it will give our citizens an extra month.
Certainly reduces a burden on the taxpayers.
Yes,
from
indeed.
A compliance standpoint, it's eminently logical, and we certainly commend the Senator for this, and we look forward to acting upon this in our very next meeting. We thank you for
Mr.
that
Chairman
presentation.
and members
Senator.
of the committee. Thank you very much.
Okay. I think what you're doing is important enough. I'm going to ask you to go to the podium, Representative Scott. And I think you're going to talk about Senate Bill 271 and some possible amendments there, too. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Georgia, Senate Bill 271. Please, sir.
I think gentleman's a stretch, Mr. Chairman, but I appreciate it anyway.
I think so.
Mr. Chairman, I bring before you a bill that was handed to me just moments ago, SB 271. And this is a bill that actually appeared before us, at least the first half in Section 1 on page 1 and the top portion of page 2, that was actually passed, that was actually read for the first time, I believe, last year into subcommittee. And I think we had taken it up through subcommittee. I'm not sure if we passed it on full committee or not. But Section 1, essentially what it does is it reduces the date for the ripening of tax deeds or property secured under a tax deed. When someone has their fails to pay property tax, essentially these types of matters are handled through auctions, and if someone buys these types of tax deeds in an auction, I believe, Mr. Chairman, again, I may need to stand corrected. You may have to correct me on it, but I believe when someone purchases these tax deeds, they then currently have 4 years before they can actually execute these deeds. This will reduce the amount of time that will allow them to secure this property, actually take possession of the property, to 1 year. Section 2, Mr. Chairman, something that was added this afternoon. It's something that I believe GATO has asked for, the Georgia Association of Tax Assessor or Tax Commissioners, Tax Officials. Section 2 essentially creates a situation that gives what I would call a last chance for someone who has failed to pay their property taxes to pay before that property is sent to auction and a tax deed is auctioned up. And oftentimes these tax deeds, when they're put out to auction, I hope I'm saying this properly, but I believe that what happens is some companies will bid the prices of the property up pretty high, and makes it very difficult for the person to secure their home. What this will do is give those homeowners one last shot at securing their property by paying their taxes, which they all should, before it actually goes to the auction block, I believe, Mr. Chairman. And I am open and willing to take any critique on that presentation whatsoever, but I think that's the gist of what this bill does.
Okay, thank you, Representative. Would you yield for a question or two?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Stevens?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And looking at the 1 year deadline, do you think we might have a problem with possibility of some of our military that might not have missed the deadline? Shouldn't we move this maybe to 2 years? And do you think the author would be approachable at moving that to a 2 year deadline for ripening?
I guess it's something that I would say would be up for discussion in subcommittee. I'm not willing at this point to say what Senator Mullis is or is not willing to do with this bill. Again, I'm just helping Senator Mullis on this today. I would say that it's something I would bring up in subcommittee. I'll certainly raise it to Senator Mullis and see why the 1 year deadline. I believe the reason for that is, in fact, last year in subcommittee, the question was, why do we have a 1 year period, or why are we allowing for a ripening of these altogether? These are, after all, property taxes that have not been paid for whatever reason. And again, if I'm not mistaken, with military personnel, I would sure hope that any tax commissioner would use their discretion that they have, if they have it, and have the ability to hold off on that, do everything they can to give any kind of waiver or extension of time to allow them to pay that. But with a lot of these, what it is just someone who has failed to pay their taxes, and it's an issue of tax fairness. If all of you on this committee and everybody in this room has paid their taxes, and someone else has failed to pay, then essentially they're taking from all of society. That's stealing from all of society. When everyone else has to pay, but someone else is able to get away with not paying. And I believe that to have some teeth in the law to make sure that they actually pay is a good thing. So I wouldn't want to extend this any longer than we have to.
Chairman Stevens, I probably yield to a more learned attorney than myself, but the bill may already contemplate and I think it's a very good issue that you raise, because it's extended for anyone laboring under a legal disability, and I believe pursuant to the Soldiers and Sailors Relief Act, those that are sojourned away from their duty station that would be outside of the ability to get notice for these various proceedings would be extended a longer redemption period, and probably even forgiveness of penalty and interest for the period, especially if they were in a combat zone, as I recall. But we'll get that clarified, and I certainly recognize your interest, especially being from the Hunter base area that you are, that you obviously have an obligation to these brave men and women that secure our freedom every day. And thank you for raising that issue. And there's one next to me, Chairman Sims, who has jumped out of planes to secure our freedom, and a lot of us think maybe hit on his head too much.
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to say the Soldiers and Sailors Relief Act also will apply here. I know it does do that. It also does it for the National Guard. As a National Guardsman, it applies for them also. All they have to do is apply through that. It covers that in that area.
Thank you. And I thank the chairman and I thank the vice chairman of the committee for helping me out with that. I would have assumed that there would be some discretion on the part of the tax commissioner, but it sounds like that is taken care of. Thank you.
We want to make sure of that, though, and I think we'll work toward confirming that, and I thank you for that. Representative Jameson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Scott, Section 2, I guess I'm missing the language that says it'd give them one last shot at paying their property tax. Does that actually deal with the administration fee and the execution fee and so forth?
Yes, ma'am. And again, this is a section that was just added literally 45 minutes ago. So I'm going to do my best at it and probably ask someone, I believe it's Mr. Tetters from Gato is here today. You were going to speak to this as well, but if the chairman would allow that, I'll allow him to speak to it in more detail. But essentially, what this is going to do is allow it sets the fee not to exceed $250. It says that it also gives the tax commissioner one last shot at trying to get the taxpayer to pay off that property tax, and to simply pay this $75 fee plus any additional expenses that are incurred, such as advertising and things of that nature on the property before it's actually put to auction. I believe that's the case. Is that okay?
Further, Representative Jameson? Did that answer your question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That all? Okay. Representative Knight.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Representative Scott, I appreciate it. I believe Section 2 looks a lot like House Bill 339 that came out of this committee, and I think this committee has vetted it very well, and we just did not get that to the House floor, and I think this is an opportunity that we can get this through. So if there are questions, I'll be happy to get with any of the committee members on that.
Thank you, Representative Knight. This is a matter of fundamental tax fairness, I believe.
It is.
Thank you. I believe you actually sponsored that legislation, didn't you? So we have sort of an expert here. Gosh, we're joined by Representative Tumlin. We're honored. I don't see any other questions. Thank you for that presentation. Wait a minute. I do. Excuse me. Chairman Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Scott, I'm not in the real estate business and maybe a little slow on the draw. What is the definition of ripen? Is that maturing? What definition do you put to ripen?
I'm going to just take a stab at it here, but I'm thinking that means it's the time that it takes for it to mature, like a bond or anything else. I think it's from the time that you actually secure it. You might actually pay for it today, but you're not going to be able to actually exercise it or execute the right to own that property, to take possession of it until it actually ripens. And so I'll defer to the chairman, but I think that's pretty close to what it is.
Just like in agriculture, when it's ready
You
to
just have
eat.
to fertilize it and everything and get it right before you can.
Yeah, and actually, and in fairness to the people who do purchase those, they are at great risk during that time because they buy the right to the property without actually taking possession, and lack of insurance and a lot of things. So it's a balancing act.
Okay. Any other questions? Anybody? Thank you, Representative Scott. Excellent job. We have actually two other bills on our agenda. Senate Bill 20. We've been asked by its sponsor to continue the hearing to the next meeting, so we will honor that request of Senator Rogers, who is conducting a Senate Finance Committee meeting as we speak and could not be here with us. And I would exercise the privilege of the chair to discuss with the committee before we conclude business today Senate Bill 185, which is sponsored by Senator Hill. I actually wish Representative Hurd was still with us because he's kind of become our resident. There he is, boat expert here. But ladies and gentlemen of the committee, what Senate Bill 185 does is make it a requirement of anybody applying for a certificate for a vessel at least 16 feet or longer in this case to also provide documentary proof that the sales and or use tax was either paid or is not payable on that high-priced chattel when it's brought into Georgia. A similar end effect as in the car titling industry now. Even there seems to be a perception in the general public, for instance, where South Carolina has a maximum of $300 sales tax on any purchase of any motor vehicle. There's still folks in Georgia that think that they can just drive over the state line, save $3,000 in sales tax, and drive back to Georgia and get their car registered, and nobody's never noticed the difference. The truth is they get a very unpolite surprise that the tax is immediately due and will have with it a significant penalty and interest feature if it's not paid. But the perception of that is very disruptive to the automobile industry, as an example. The same is true with the boat industry, especially the over 16-foot boats, which in many cases cost as much as cars. And if people think that they can go to a sales tax haven, and we've already seen with ATVs where that's actually advertised to defraud businesses in Georgia, in my opinion, and also the tax structure of Georgia, and then import that chattel after purchase there back into the state, and hence avoidance of the tax, I think we've created a very unfair business environment for Georgia businesses, and we certainly are not able to collect the justifiably due taxes for Georgia. So I'll ask the committee to give serious consideration to Senate Bill 185 when Senator Hill returns. And if Representative Hurd, Chairman Hurd, would like to speak on this matter, I do know he knows this subject matter. If you would like to be heard before we conclude, I'd be glad to recognize you, sir.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll be very, very brief. As the committee's aware, we did do a boat titling bill that's over in the Senate now. This bill by Senator Hill is actually a predecessor to the boat titling bill that was dropped, I believe, last year. So it carries provisions to take care of some of the problems, yet not all the problems that we tried to address in House Bill 1000. So it is a good piece of legislation, and if there's any opportunity, depending on how things go in the Senate, there may be an amendment that would could attach to it that takes most of the text of House Bill 1000.
We certainly respect the gentleman's thoughts in that regard, and if for any reason that the titling initiative is not successful, it won't deal with the theft problem that we have with our vessels, but it certainly might deal with the I guess, fraudulent tax haven idea that a lot of folks have.
Well,
At least
and-
that part of it we can get settled. So
And I expect the chairman and committee is aware that Georgia is the highest theft of boats of any state in the country.
we if we weren't before your bill, we certainly are now, Chairman Hurd, and we appreciate that. We sincerely do. Is there anybody on the committee wish to be heard on any matter that is the business of this committee today? I don't see anyone. Is there any? Are there any other bills or matters to come before the committee that I might have inadvertently skipped? I think it's incredibly impressive knowing what everybody's schedules were today at 2 o'clock that you all were able to come and attend this meeting, and we thank you for that, and we look forward to getting close to finishing our process. I think we've talked about just about every bill we have in the breast of this committee today, so we have deliberated on close to 300 this year, as you all know. And we're finally close to the end. But I thank the committee for your attendance, your commitment, as always, to the quality of the way we deal with these important matters. And with that, we stand adjourned.